Hey everyone, good afternoon. We're going to let everyone kind of file in the next minute or two, and then we'll get started. But thanks so much for joining us today. We're looking forward to the webinar. All right, awesome. I see a lot of people have joined. Love to see when you start that and everyone just kind of files right in. It's awesome. If everyone wants to just drop in the chat, just a quick hi, hello, where you're tuning in from, what organization you're with, feel free to do that. Jesse, thank you for kicking that off. Always takes one. Awesome. I see Denver. I'm tuning in from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm work from home. Dipjar is started in Boston, slowly moving to Pittsburgh. We're kind of all over, but I'm in Pittsburgh, PA. And Kim, where are you?
I'm in Montreal, Canada.
Yes, a little different. It's cold here in Pittsburgh today. I don't know what your weather's like. It was 80 degrees, sunny and hot yesterday, and today it is cold again. So yep. It is the season of spring, I guess.
It is. Those magical 3 weeks where you don't know what you're going to get. And you have to leave the house with a parka, an umbrella, and a bikini just to have all the covers, the basic covers.
Yep. My winter coat is still hanging in the closet just in case.
Next to the flip-flops.
Yes, precisely. Awesome. See, we've got people from all over. We've got some people from Canada, which is awesome. So we're going to go ahead, since it's 2 after now, people can keep obviously filing in, but just to get us started, my name is Melissa. I am the VP of marketing at Dipjar. I started with Dipjar about 2 years ago. Prior to Dipjar, though, I spent about 6 years in the nonprofit space. So I love the nonprofit community. I, personally really love our webinars because it's a great learning experience for me too. If you haven't heard about Dipjar, we offer an in-person fundraising device. It's a really cool jar, accepts credit card donations, set it up in your lobby, take it to a coffee shop, take it to any of your events, just makes it super easy, fast, and fun for donations. If you haven't joined us for one of our free webinars before, what we've been doing is just inviting guests in the community, some thought leaders to come in and talk to all of you about some hot topics. So I'm super excited to introduce Kim from Phil. Kim, go ahead and take it away.
Hi, thanks, Melissa. Hi, everybody. Really nice to be here with you today. So I'm Kim Fuller. I'm founder and CEO of Phil. We are dedicated to the nonprofit sector. We help organizations with their strategies, communication, and fundraising. So it's really a pleasure to be with you here today. And I'm hoping that this topic is really going to resonate with you guys, because in our day-to-day work, we know that a lot of organizations are having to rethink the way they do things, which is why I love solutions like Dipjar and others that are just coming out there with some great new innovative ways to do fundraising. And we're going to take it back a step and talk about some key elements for strategic planning. So that's what I'm going to get underway with you right now. If technology will be on my side, I'll start with the screen share. And Melissa, if you want to just confirm, everybody's going to have access to these slides afterwards. I'm happy to share them. You've got the copy, so don't panic. You can obviously take notes as much as you want. We'll take questions later on. And you can use the chat to ask questions as well. Don't be shy. That's what makes this a better experience for everybody, other than just me talking at you for the next little while. So I welcome your questions, and I get to learn through your questions as well, which makes it a lot of fun for me. All right, so let's get going here. Melissa, you want to just confirm that you can see this opening slide?
I can see it. So that means everyone else should. If you can't for any reason, please just let us know in the chat.
All right, great. Thanks so much. So yeah, welcome. I'm excited to share some practical tips with you today. Hopefully take some of the fear and concern out of strategic planning. For about half of my career, I was on the receiving end of branding, communication, fundraising, and marketing requests that often made little sense to me. And so I came to understand that the issue was more around having either poor plan in place or not having a plan at all. And that's when I took an interest in strategy work and have been honing my skills ever since. So as if life wasn't hard enough for nonprofits and charities since the beginning of time, along comes a pandemic and turns everything upside down. So many organizations were caught off guard, having to pivot to virtual events, work from home, adapt their work tools, find a way to survive. I think we can all agree that 2020 was sheer panic for most of us. I'll always remember this quote from Vicki Saunders, who's the founder of SheEO, and she once said, "The world is broken. What an exciting time to be alive." And in that moment, my entire perspective changed, and I decided to look at things differently. Instead of systemic issues, being frustrated with the systemic issues all around me and at every level, I saw this period of disruption in the nonprofit space as an opportunity to help my clients do things differently, try new things, explore, and experiment unapologetically. Now, I know that taking risks and going outside your comfort zone is not something that comes naturally to nonprofits. I appreciate the responsibility that you have. And my intention here today is not to introduce you to radical behavior. What I hope you'll leave this webinar with is how changing the way we approach strategic planning can improve everything from employee retention to more effective fundraising, clearer stakeholder communications, and more. So let's take a look at some of the issues that we're facing in the sector. This report was released by the independent sector, and they had this survey that they did to follow the impact of COVID-19 on large and mid-sized nonprofit organizations. And the survey illustrates that the pandemic and the resulting, economic issues that we had significant effects on services, operations, and the people working in the nonprofit sector. So if you're here today, because you're part of these statistics or clawing your way through, looking for a better way forward for your organization. Other sources show that employee recruitment and retention is a major issue today. It's imperative that organizations focus on their workplace culture and create an environment in which employees are engaged, organized, and delivering results. Lack of clarity in the roles, lack of adequate training, limited access to technology at work are some of the biggest pain points for people who work in the sector right now. As an employer myself, these statistics are terrifying to me. Not only are there direct costs to losing an employee, the indirect costs of employee turnover are equally troubling. There's lost productivity, lost engagement with existing employees, because some of them start wondering and questioning their own purpose within the organization. And one of the biggest ones that with nonprofits that I've witnessed is the loss of institutional knowledge. So people who leave without leaving a trace of their work practices, their contacts, information that could help the next person take over their work. I can't even begin to put a price tag on that. So we really have to pay attention to cultivate, stronger workplaces that will make sure that we can avoid these expensive turnovers. The key insights that we're seeing from the Fundraising Effectiveness Project is that large donors have helped the dollar growth go positively from the last couple of years, but new and small donors are not being acquired or recaptured, and that's driving down the donor counts. And so retention is lower with the least active donors. Large and higher committed donors are sticking around, but the smaller, infrequent and new donors are being left behind. And so when you look at all the things that are within your organization's control, donor retention is one of the biggest ones that can work in your favor. Short of somebody passing away or having, huge financial, changes in their lifestyle, everything else is within your control. So we're going to look at some of those techniques today of how to keep people engaged. We know that donation revenue and interest in philanthropy is continuing to grow across the board. We're seeing it, with a lot of social activism and other activities. The environment obviously is a more and more pressing topic, and rightfully so. There's an interest in giving back to the community, but it's still important that nonprofits prepare their strategies to the shifting demographic preferences. So there's a whole generation of donors who don't give in the same way that their parents did before them. We need to recognize that. We need to adapt. If we try to do the old ways, hoping to get new results, we know that doesn't work. So our organizations need to diversify how they engage with donors and rethink events and volunteer opportunities. Focusing on donor retention on like both online and in traditional donation methods should always be a priority for your organization and for your strategic plan. Looking at some more statistics just to paint the portrait of what we're up against. In July 2021, the data from the philanthropy panel study, which was a long-running survey done at Indiana University School of Philanthropy, revealed that in 2018, the number of American households that said that they give to charity dropped below 50% for the first time. And despite a slight improvement since last spring, the financial situation of most organizations remains fragile. Here in Canada, we have 170,000 registered charities, and there's an estimated loss of $10 billion since the beginning of the pandemic. And over half the charities are reporting a decline in revenue since the onset of the pandemic, with an average decline of 43%. So this is, really tough. We all know it. If you've been working in this field over the last couple of years, you've felt it, and it's created a lot of pressure on organizations. We also know that we're seeing more interest in corporate giving. It is a little bit more complicated building those relationships. It certainly goes beyond goodwill, like the traditional arms of philanthropy and fundraising with individuals and foundations, because sometimes people can be suspicious of companies, thinking that it's a bit of a marketing ploy, or they're hoping to overcome some negative publicity. But we're starting to see that as diversity and social justice issues gain momentum, we're seeing that we can expect to see more corporations aligning themselves with nonprofits. And because younger North Americans are cause focused, we think this is an alignment that is going to be strongest between companies who are trying to appeal to the Gen Z and millennials. So that's going to be an important shift that we're going to see continuing over the next few years. And this presents opportunity because nonprofits can really benefit from the strategic corporate partnerships. Companies are actively seeking to encourage workplace volunteering to help build a stronger culture among their employees, and charities can benefit from these long-term relationships if they're built into the strategic plan and those alliances are chosen carefully. So I want to take a look at this this model. I love this model. It's by the Horizon Global Academy, and they found, as I've witnessed, that challenges in the nonprofits face are quite common, and they cluster under these 4 categories, which they call SOFT. So strategy, organizational, funding, and technology. We know we love our acronyms in the sector, right? So here's another one, SOFT. And so the strategic challenges of a nonprofit organization are closely related to the impact on the individual, the target group, the community level, and impact is really the new currency of the nonprofit world. And the strongest channel to communicate with our societies is through sponsors, donors, beneficiaries, and our volunteers. And that's why nonprofit organizations need to measure and manage their impact. And we're going to talk about that a bit later in the presentation. One of the other aspects of strategic challenges is the stakeholder management, right? So it's impossible to run a nonprofit organization without managing your stakeholders. And when we're unsuccessful in the strategic impact of stakeholder management, then we also end up having visibility problems, which is also very common with small to medium-sized nonprofits that don't have a lot of resources. So you can immediately start to see how all of these things tie together. With organizational challenges, these are mostly about the structures and the systems of the nonprofit organization. And unfortunately, few of them are successful to adapt their systems and structures with the changes that we're seeing right now. And the lack of the organizational performance is usually because of improper structures and systems. So we can't ignore those when we're starting to do our strategic plan. We need to take all of that into consideration. And that also has to do with staffing, which is why I was just mentioning those statistics about, what's happening in the workforce in the nonprofit sector, because it's a really important part of how we run our organizations. We can't do it without our staff. And we also have to consider our volunteers in the mix as well when it comes to our organizational challenges. And, some organizations do a great job managing their volunteers and others struggle. So that's also something to give some thought to. I'd say funding challenges are probably the most common, most visible challenges of all of them for nonprofits. The diversification and resilience is really, necessary in today's day and age for finding sustainable solutions. And funding resources, can change in a couple of ways. We have like online fundraising, which has now become such an important part of our tool belt, and sometimes it's replacing altogether the classical channels. Some people are making a mix of both, but you have to really be aware of how your audience wants to give, and you need to shift with those trends. The second thing is that funds go to the projects rather than the operations of the organization, right? So it's becoming more and more difficult to explain to funders that, yes, we need to run our programs, but we also need to keep the lights on. We also need to train our staff. So we need to be able to make the case for having support beyond just program or project funding. Technology challenges have come to light more recently in the pandemic, and it's certainly not the least of our challenges in the nonprofit realm. And there's been a lot of studying around the fact that we have all this data available to us. It's either not being collected, or it's not being analyzed, or it's not being used to help us show our impact and how to use that information. We're just not often trained to know what to do with the information, and yet it's so valuable to our organizations. So that's another aspect that charities are having to adapt and learn what to do with data, how to manage their data, and so on and so forth. And so there's, you roll in all the challenges of managing a website and social media. Not everybody's doing it as successfully as they could. That's another learning curve for most organizations. So we can see that technology is constantly, throwing us for a loop, and it's hard to stay on top of things. But we're going to look at all these aspects today, how to get on top of them, how to plan for them so it can come together and really equip you for a stronger future for your organization. So I'm going to stop here for a sec, and hopefully with Melissa's help, we can see with this little poll that's going to pop up on your screen, if you want to tell us which of these resonate with your organization. I'd love to get a sense of what's going on with your nonprofit. We'll just give it a minute to let people respond. So I'm seeing a lot of people saying that their strategic plan is not detailed enough. They had one maybe that was pre-pandemic, not suiting their needs anymore. Few of you, all of the above, that's totally fine too. Don't be shy. You can share the truth here. We're amongst friends and colleagues. And some of you also have a more corporate style strategic plan that might not be aligning. So that's good to know. That's great. Thanks for that input. I'm seeing that looks like a lot of your plans aren't detailed enough. So that's good to know, because we're going to be covering how to do that today. So we'll just end the poll here. Thanks for playing along. We're going to do another one a little bit later, and we'll share the results of that. So yeah, I mean, when we talk about preparing a strategic plan, it's usually a very daunting process. People get very nervous. They really aren't sure where to start, who to call on for help. And what I've always said to organizations who come to us with a fundraising or a communications project is the first thing I'll ask them is, where's your strategic plan? And often I get, that deer caught in headlights look, or embarrassment that, they haven't updated it in a while, or they don't really know what to do with it. And it really is important that you tackle that first, because people trying to do the work that we do, we can't get anywhere without it, nor can we guarantee whether we'll be successful in helping you with your fundraising or communication strategies if we don't really know what the bigger picture is, right? So if we look at the structure of planning anything fundraising or comms, you can't do it successfully. So they kind of nest into one another, which is why I picked this picture of having these that fit into one another. In a typical situation, if you're trying to do redo your website or have a social media strategy. And if you don't have a communications plan, then we don't know where to start. We don't know what the clear goals are. We don't know if we can, measure the success. We don't know what success we're really shooting for, right? And your communications plan should be in service of your development plan or your fundraising plan, and your fundraising plan should be in the service of your strategic plan. So they kind of nest one inside the other for this really strong trifecta. And let me tell you, when you invest the time in doing all of the strategic work, it will come back to you in spades when you invest in outside support for any kind of marketing, communication, or fundraising campaign. I know it seems like a big investment up front, but it really does save time and money down the line. It will make your suppliers happier. So if you're working with a web developer or you're working with a fundraising campaign expert that's going to help you with a campaign, they will love you for having all of this laid out clearly for them, because it means they can do the best work for you. So when we look at what funders are looking for, they're looking for your strategic plans. They want a solid written set of goals. They want to see that you've got your to-do lists all lined up, and they want to know how you're going to be measuring the success of those efforts. So what you want to be doing is having that strategic plan that not only your leadership team can follow on a daily basis, but they can also use it and serve it up during grant proposals and other efforts that are being made for fundraising, so that they can show that you've really thought through all the steps and that the investment that people are going to make in your organization is going to be a smart one. So the funders also want to see that you've got coherent messaging across the board. They want to know that your ducks are in a row, and that the actions that you're taking match up with the goals that you've set out. And so what it does is it creates more trust in the donor. They have more confidence in you, and it builds a better relationship right out of the gates. So to do that, once you've done your strategic plan, then you can do your communications plan that shows how you're going to roll out all of your action items and what that actually means to the stakeholders and everybody else that's involved in your organization. So when people work on their strategic plan in-house, many of the organizations begin with a strategic planning process using a template. And that's why I asked in the poll, like, how many of you have a bit more of a corporate plan versus one that's really geared to nonprofits, is because there's a really big difference between using a template that was made for a business versus one for the nonprofit. And nonprofits really need to go beyond just setting the financial goals for their organization. And to a certain extent, I think that businesses are now starting to incorporate a little bit more of the social aspect to their business plans. But in general, what we see is that it's really difficult to work from a template that was built for the corporate world when you're trying to apply it to the nonprofit world. So we really want to get specific about what's right for your organization and try to avoid falling into taking the easy route and getting something that's more generic, because in the end, it won't serve your organization well. So when we look at how the strategic planning process has changed in the last few years, we can definitely say that gone are the days of doing a 5 to 10 year complex plan. We need shorter, easier to understand and easier to implement plans. And so when we looked at the poll earlier, we saw a lot of you saying that we just don't have it. It's not detailed enough. It's there, but it's not really helping us get moving things forward. So easier to implement is definitely something that we want to look towards. And also, I'm a firm believer in democratizing the planning process. Ask everyone in and around the organization to provide input. This does not mean have 36 people decide on what direction you take. It simply means to listen to as many voices around the table as possible to best understand how everyone works together and how the decisions are going to affect them. There's nothing worse than seeing the leadership team closing themselves off in an office, working on all these things, and not even involving the people who are on the ground working on it every day. Those are the people who you want around the table. And the people who are in the leadership positions should be in listening mode, and then decision mode, right? But really getting as many people in there as possible to help and to hear all those voices is really key to building a strategic plan that's going to, stand the test of time. Analyzing the competitive landscape is another one that I really want to point out that is worthwhile taking the time to do. It's really critical to be able to position your organization clearly. So when I started in this space 22 years ago, I didn't have any competition, right? Especially in my city and in my province, and in this part of my country, there was really nobody doing what I had set out to do, which was offer services to the nonprofit sector. So my tagline and my spiel was really like, hey, look at me, I'm different because I'm dedicated to the nonprofit sector. But today, like, there are so many people serving the nonprofit sector. There's so many consultants, there's so many firms that are dedicated to specific parts of marketing and fundraising for nonprofits that I can't just say that I only serve the nonprofit anymore, because that wouldn't be enough of a differentiation to really stand out. So we've put a lot of thought into our positioning, and now we're happy to declare that we're on this mission to rethink how nonprofits can create systemic change using an inclusive mindset. And you might be wondering, well, what does that mean? And that's what we want. We want you to ask us more. We want to talk to you more about that, right? So it's important to have a claim that your other competitors can't make, and you need to spend the time about what that looks like, and you can't do it without knowing what's out there. And what I'm seeing a lot in my line of work is organizations that have been around for 10, 20, 100 years, and they used to be the leaders in their space, and then they look up one day and they realize that there's tons more like them in their backyard, and now they really have to fight for their part, their slice of the pie in terms of funding and opportunities and even staff. So really important to stay on top of what's happening around you in the competitive landscape. And don't be fooled by the nonprofit, nature of lovey fuzzy, stuff. There's competition, fierce competition in the charitable space. So we all know that, SWOT analysis, doing the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, that's a typical exercise that's done in strategic planning. We see them in every single one. And just want to give a bit of a differentiation, because when I receive somebody's strategic plan, I can see that there's a little bit of confusion around what's what. So your strengths and weaknesses are internal to your organization, where the opportunities and threats are external to your organization. So I just want to throw that little tip out to you in case you're doing this exercise and you can mix them up a little bit. Internal is your strengths and weaknesses, external is your opportunities and threats. At Phil, we go beyond a SWOT analysis, and we do a so what analysis. And so we do that to distill the different elements highlighted in the traditional SWOT analysis, and we want to frame them within the organization's unique positioning, marking a clear and more measurable path to success. So what that does is, going beyond the SWOT analysis means taking the time to explain the reasons why you're investigating a particular aspect of your development. So, for example, why do you think that your organization has a certain strength? How is it relevant to your overall mission? Why are the opportunities that you've outlined worth broaching? Or what are you seeing in terms of a weakness within your organization? What can or should you do about it? What are the threats that you're seeing, concerning the organization, and how do you overcome those barriers? So it's not enough to just identify them. You want to identify them and then say, what am I going to do about this, right? And that, to me, is already a huge step in the right direction for how you're going to make your strategic plan actionable. And then it's not just going to sit on a shelf gathering dust. I was thinking about what story I could tell about this, because I'm seeing a lot of funders getting cold feet when they're not seeing a solid strategic plan put in front of them, or at least an executive summary of a strategic plan that will give them reassurance in the organization. And I have two two boys who are now young men. And if my son came to me and asked me for $100, I would immediately ask him how the money's going to be spent, right? And funders are no different. They want to see a plan. They want to know what's involved. How likely do you think I'd be to give him the money if he answered, I don't know, right? I'd be like, no, I'm not giving you $100 if you're not going to tell me what you're doing with it, right? Because as a mother's brain, you'd start imagining all sorts of nefarious activities. But if he answered, well, mom, I need $40 for school books and I need 35 for a new pair of sneakers. And I was hoping to maybe go to the movies with some friends after I take care of, getting all my school supplies, then I'd be far more likely, to consider his request. So it's the same thing when it comes to funders. They want to know that you've got a plan because their money is going to help you achieve those plans. And if you can't articulate it clearly enough, they will go to the next organization who does a better job of explaining what they're going to do with the money. So it's a lot of work, and getting outside help is obviously an option, and obviously one that we recommend for obvious reasons. But I wanted to take a minute here to look at why it's important to consider getting external support for your strategic plan. So getting outside help allows you to use your time and your people more effectively. Corners are cut, plans are drag out, and staff get stressed out to the max when internal teams also have to focus on strategy. So having outside experts provides a framework for the strategic planning exercise. And consultants can offer like a neutrality that comes in handy when staff have their own personal agendas or have been there for a long time. Getting that fresh perspective can really help. And getting assistance from an experienced impartial third party really pays off. So yes, it's expensive to hire external experts, but the invisible costs of not having a plan or never finishing one, or having inexperienced employees trying to muddle their way through a plan costs the organization even more, and we don't even realize it. Not to mention that sometimes internal conflicts can arise when large changes are suggested by in-house staff or board members. Feelings can get hurt, and it can get sticky. So it's important, yes, to have your board involved, leading the planning process and being part of it for sure. But having that consultant and that outside firm can help you, having that intermediary between the board, the internal team, offering some mediation, some fresh perspective, and taking the pressure off of your team. We certainly, as external, support, we can't do the job for you, but we can certainly give you the tools and the processes to make it go a lot smoother, because you guys already have all the answers anyways. So we're just there to help you along. So let's turn and look at what to include in a plan. Before we do that, I just want to call on Melissa to ask us to do this next quiz with you guys, just to get a sense of where you guys are at with your strategic plan. So we want to know if you've ever done one before, if it needs to be updated, if it's needing a refresh, or if you have one but you just don't know what to do with it. I'd love to see where you guys are at with that. Okay, we'll give it another minute. I'm seeing that a lot of people have one, needs to be updated. Quite a lot of you also just have never done one before, so that's great. I'm excited that you're here to learn about that today. A few of you know you have one, but you don't know how to implement it. All right, so we're gonna end this poll and publish it. We'll share those results with you guys. So looks like the majority of you have one, but you really need to refresh it since the pandemic. That's totally to be expected. You guys were just trying to keep your head above water that whole time. And I'm glad you're here today to try and get some steps on what to do about it next. So we're going to look at what to include. And the first thing that we always start with is mission, vision, values, and the role of your organization. So I just want to give some clarity again, because sometimes I see a lot of organizations that get mixed up between what a mission is and a vision is. And so typically a vision is established at the onset of your organization. It usually doesn't change. Maybe some wordsmithing over time, but generally that it's there to stay. The mission should be revised every 3 to 5 years in line with your strategic plan. And the values should be established with the whole team, including your volunteers. I really think that's not only a great team building exercise, but you really get some juicy stuff to work with. So don't do that behind closed doors. Really do it. You can poll, you can send out like a survey monkey, you can do it a bunch of different ways, but the best way to do it is just get around the table or on a Zoom call with your team and volunteers and work through with what really matters to you guys as an organization, and establish those values. We establish them because it's the thing that not only besides your mission that we're going to attract people to your organization, they're going to be attracted to your values. When you say what you stand for and what you believe in, that's where I'm going to find a rapport with your organization, right? So it's really good to come straight out and put those in your marketing and in your fundraising material as well. And then the role of your organization, it helps show that you've given thought to your purpose and that you know what sets you apart from others. So this goes back to what I was talking about in the positioning statement. So you really want to declare, like, this is our role. This is what we do in our space. And it's really affirming. It's great for the staff and the volunteers to know that purpose. And to have it in your strategic plan right out of the gates it's a good place to start exploring what that is and then what that means for you. So what else goes in? We're seeing a lot of organizations that include their theory of change. This is ignored by quite a lot of organizations because they find it very academic and heavy. And in a world where impact measurement has become so important, being able to explain your theory of change is a really valuable tool to have on hand. It's not a must-have for your strategic plan, but it certainly can help. I've seen quite a few complicated ones in my day, but I love this one from the Make Way Foundation. This if and then, which will allow us to boom. Like, it's just, they articulate it so clearly what they want to achieve, right? And they want to advance, justice and reconciliation and economic and ecological well-being. And it's gonna transform things, and it's gonna shift things, and it's gonna be local, and it's gonna be across the country. Like, it's great. You just get totally drawn into it. And who wouldn't want to get on board and help them when you read that kind of statement, right? So it's really a great way to invest some time here to describe why your particular way of working will be effective. And you want to show how change happens in the short, medium, and long term so that you can achieve that impact, right? Impact is a huge currency right now in the charitable space. It can be presented in a visual diagram, as a narrative. It can be a bit of both. It can be developed at the beginning when you're doing your strategic planning, or it can come in to describe like a specific program of yours or a project. You want it to be credible, so it has to be based on experience and insight and some research that you've done. It has to be achievable. It needs to be supported by the stakeholders. So you need to share your theory of change with the people around you and say, does this make sense? Does this resonate with you? And then you have to be able to measure, things along the way to be able to come back and say, yes, we've been able to achieve these things. So I included a couple little samples here. Like, this one could be super bare bones, right? You got the problem, strategies, interventions, outcome, solution. That can be a theory of change. Other organizations get a little bit more narrative, get a little bit more visual. You can tell your story. And these kind of things are really handy for your fundraisers to have on hand, your communications team. And people love to, have these on their website. They're great for, PowerPoint presentations. And it just lets you tell your story in a really effective way. So take some time, look into it, Google theory of change, send me an email if you want more information. It's really a great place to start. If we look at the key parts of your strategic plan, you need to have the foundational work done. So really doing the mission, vision, values, and role work that I just talked about. Then you move into the development of the plan, where you set your specific goals. How are you going to measure them? What goes into it? What's the governance around it? Do we need to have some changes in our governance structures? What are the changes that are required in human resources? All of those need to be detailed, because without thinking it all the way through, you could be caught at a point where you just realize that these goals aren't doable because you don't have the human resources to pull it off. So you really want to make sure that you plan for adding more people if you have to, or figuring out where you're going to make the money to be able to afford the people to help you move forward. So all of that needs to be detailed. And then what kind of strategic partnerships are going to help you move your mission forward? What does it mean for fundraising and development? What does it mean for communications? I'd also add here, what does it mean for technology, right? Because we looked at that diagram early on in the presentation. Don't forget your technology component, because there are going to be some requirements around that should also be included in your strategic plan. And then how are we going to come back and check on how our work is going? What's our monitoring and measuring plan? When are we going to revisit this plan? I recommend to check in every 6 months, 12 months to see how you're doing, and don't be shy to tweak it. Your plan is a living, breathing thing, and you should be informing your future decisions based on your past experiences. So just because you wrote the plan 2 years ago doesn't mean that you can't continually tweak it, and you should be doing that, and you should give yourselves the space to do that. The most important thing to ensure is that the different elements of your strategic communications fundraising triad are working in sync to reflect the values and the goals of your organization. So by doing this, everyone involved in the organization is going to be clear about what steps you want to take, why they're being taken. And this goes back to the first slides where I was talking to you about, staff retention. It's no wonder that people are leaving their jobs when they don't feel satisfied in the work that they're doing. They don't know if the work that they're doing is getting them anywhere or getting their organization anywhere, right? So that strategic planning really helps everybody understand why you're doing the work that you're doing and in which way it should be done. Having each element in place is going to help your communications and your fundraising activities, and you'll be able to have results that you're really proud of. So if we go back to that airport metaphor, which I was saying, well, I actually didn't say it earlier today, but I was saying to a colleague of mine earlier, that's like when you're trying to travel and you don't even have a map, you don't know where you're going. This is the same thing. It's like you're planning a trip, you want to be prepared, you pack everything you need for the journey, you make sure you have all your documents in place, you know where you're traveling to, and then you feel confident when you leave for that trip, right? And that's the same kind of feeling we want to have here, is you want to have that preparedness. And that's what a strategic plan is going to help you achieve. So launching a fundraising project or an awareness campaign is similar. You want to get all your planning in place, have a clear destination in mind, communicate with purpose, and you'll be sure to stand out. So I hope you enjoyed the webinar today. Don't be shy to reach out if you have any questions. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can email me. We also share a ton of advice for nonprofits on our blog and our social media channels, so be sure to check those out. And you can sign up for our newsletter for more information and hot tips. And I'll be happy to take any questions if there are any.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kim. That was awesome. As Kim mentioned, yeah, just go ahead and drop any questions you have in the chat or in the Q&A. I just wanted to remind everyone that you will receive a copy of the presentation and a full recording. So I will get that out to you at the mercy of when Zoom has the webinar recording available. Sometimes it takes a little bit, but I will be sure to get that out to you by tonight or tomorrow morning.
Are participants able to come on camera?
They should be able to. If anybody would like to, you should.
I'd love to hear from somebody who has no strategic plan and how they're feeling after this presentation, because I'm dying to know if it's taken some of the anxiety out of it, or if you're feeling more intimidated or what's still on your mind with what we've just covered. If you want to put it in the chat, that's fine too.
We've got, well, two questions. One, just kind of housekeeping. Kim, does your firm work with US-based nonprofits?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we have clients as far as Africa, worked with organizations in the UK, Europe, all over for sure. I think the pandemic has actually helped us in that respect, because we used to be limited by geographic barriers, and can you come to the office and let's do a brainstorm together, and now it's like, yeah, just jump on Zoom, it doesn't matter where we are.
Totally. Right? Totally. All right, so we've got another one from Jordan. Do you have any tips on how to keep the strategic plan alive, not just in a shared file?
Yeah, definitely. That would come into the action plan where you set out specific goals, I would say even each month, to keep yourselves accountable. And so if you do your calendar year and you're like, okay, well, between now and June, we need to make sure that we roll this out, that we get this done, or that we look into this, that, or the other. And then, each month you want to say, okay, how are we doing in respect to that one? And also just be mindful of the fact to not put some big milestones at times of the year when you're super overloaded with other activities, right? So it's hard to work on the business and in the business at the same time. So that's a piece of advice that I would give you, so that if you have like your AGM is in June, and so your staff is going to be really busy prepping for the AGM and everything like that. So try not to put things at the same time in terms of the action plan.
Totally. How long does the planning process take to get through all the steps?
That's a good question. I didn't cover that. It's true. It really depends. We used to think that it would take like 6 to 12 months to do like a strategic. We can't do that anymore. That's not realistic. You can't afford the time to set aside. Executive directors are too busy managing the day-to-day stuff. You really want to move quicker. But that being said, you got to leave time for the, doing the proper research. Got to leave time for thinking and letting things stew and develop. So I would say you should at least plan for a good 3 to 4 months, to get it all done. If you think of like discovery, development, and delivery as 3 milestones, like the way we do it at Phil, you've got a month for discovery, a month for developing it, and then a month for delivering it. That's fast tracking, but it can be done. It depends on how many programs you have. Are you a small organization? Are you a big shop? Like there's so many factors that play into how long a strategic plan exercise can take. If you only have 4 board members and you have 1 service and that's all you're doing, like you can get it done really quickly. If you're running a shelter with 16 different services and you've got a board of directors of 24 people and a staff of 60, it's probably going to take you a bit longer than that.
Yeah. And speaking about board members, we've got 2 questions, a little bit similar. One is a smaller nonprofit that has a board that doesn't see the value of the strategic plan. Another person has a strategic plan, but the board doesn't seem to think it's necessary to keep it up to date. So kind of like, what's that conversation with the board, getting them to stay up to date and, in the process?
Yeah, I think my first recommendation would be get governance training for your board, because those 2 are just terrifying to me, that boards would not see the importance of maintaining a strategic plan. It's really hard in a dynamic where, these people are brought in to support your organization, and they are, leaders in your community or leaders in the business community, and they usually come with a certain amount of ego. And so telling them that they don't know something doesn't really go over very well. So what I would suggest is just tying it back to money, right? If you tell a board, look, funders expect us to have a plan and they expect it to be a maintained plan. Otherwise, our funding is in jeopardy. They'll sit up straighter, they'll listen a little bit more attentively, right? Because it all comes down to that, precious resource of money. So that usually gets their attention. Also reminding them that they are responsible, that their role in this governance role is super important, and that they need to be part of the planning process. And I think that involving them in the planning process gives them ownership of it. And I see a lot of executive directors who just get fed up with their board and they go off and they do all the strategic planning on their own with their staff, and then they come back and they present it to the board. But the board has no skin in the game. They're just like, this isn't ours, right? You made this without us. So that's why bringing everybody into the conversation, like I was saying earlier, is really important for that.
Yeah. And Jesse, I think that piece just kind of answered the question you just asked about, you have a small nonprofit and your board isn't too involved. Any ideas? I think getting them involved, like Kim said, getting them involved in that strategic plan gets them to be, they have a piece, like skin in the game. Like they're there,
Yeah.
they helped you make this. And then hopefully that will also encourage them to stay a little bit more engaged with what you're doing, your work, and the fundraising that needs to happen to like fulfill your strategic plan.
Yeah. One thing I'll add to that is I work with a lot of grassroots organizations. And I think one of the biggest things that sets people off is this word strategic planning, right? And so if you have a small organization and you have the sweetest board members because they're there out of the kindness of their heart, they're passionate about your cause, but they're like, I don't know how to do strategy. I'm not a strategic person. I'm this or I'm that, or I'm a nurse who knows a lot about these things, but I'm not strategic, right? And that can really scare people off. But it's not scary when you're just talking about what you already know or what you can go and research, right? And that's what you have specialized consultants for, is to help you along and guide you in that process. So you need to get over that fear of jumping into it, or people thinking that they're not able to contribute to the strategic planning process because they're not strategic by nature. You don't have to be to contribute. And I think that's an important message to get across the board.
Yeah, totally. And just to speak from my experience, I've been through a strategic planning a couple times, at the nonprofit I worked at, and then also helping other nonprofits through it. And I think what you just said is something that a lot of people here might need to hear, is that not all of this is going to be new. Like, a lot of this, it just sometimes takes the consultant asking you the directed question or saying like, have you talk? And they're like, okay, so like, that's this part of your plan. Like, you actually know all this and you know what you're doing. You just don't have it written down, something that you can follow and kind of achieve throughout the year, 2 years, however long you've planned it for.
Yeah. And I think I love the strategic planning also because it gives nonprofits permission to say no to stuff. And we are always like having, board members rush up to you and say, oh, we got this great idea for this event that we want to do, or we just like heard about this other cool thing that we should absolutely do, or we have this chance for visibility over here. And like things are just thrown at you all the time. And if you're trying to run the charity and manage all of those opportunities, your head's going to explode, right? It's just too much. And not everything is a great idea. It's a lovely gesture, but it doesn't all have to be put into place. So when somebody comes to you with a good idea, you'll say, okay, give me a sec. Let me check my strategic plan. Let me see if it fits into any of these actions that we're doing or could be added, or maybe it's better than something else. And then you can say, you know what, doesn't really fit for right now, but let's park it and we'll come back to this, maybe in a year or so when we're a bit further along in checking of those other things off of our list. So it also just gives you a chance to say no.
Totally. So another question that you might not know like a hard answer for, but what percentage of nonprofit organizations are incorporating the theory of change concept you described? So maybe speak to like your clients, like how many of them are actually utilizing that?
Yeah, I'd say in my experience, almost 50%. But it really has to do with the sector. So what I'm noticing is that the people who work in more academic settings, more environmental groups, sectors that have already been impact focused from the get-go, those are the organizations that seem to be adopting this theory of change practice more than others. And what I'm excited to see is that more and more of these grassroots organizations, these smaller organizations, are learning to use the theory of change to articulate their vision of how they're going to get stuff done. And it's amazing to see them go because they've got so much, conviction with what they're doing now, because they can express it in a really clear way that says, we're going to do this, and this is how we're going to do it, and this is how we're going to show you we did it, and that's just so empowering.
Totally. So this question's for me. Somebody's asking some questions about DipJar and how DipJar kind of fits into the strategic plan conversation. And I think what I would say to that is, I think the most successful DipJar customers are those who actually incorporate the DipJar into their annual fundraising plan, which then, supports your strategic plan. So instead of thinking about, even just events or things like that as a one-time way to raise money, think about how it can help, kind of your entire year and how it can support that. And so what we've helped coach a lot of our customers on is, all right, how can you start using your dip jar every day? Like, where can you get the fundraising device in front of an audience, like, which is going to increase brand recognition, increase, donors, potentially some new volunteers, building that top of the funnel, like donor. And then, all of that then supports the strategic plan and where you see your organization over the next couple of years. Because as you know, to get your organization to grow, all takes money. Fundraising is so important. And so we're just happy to kind of help facilitate some easy fundraising for you.
Yeah. And I think it's, when we're looking at the funding models and the technology models, I feel like that's where DipJar just kind of sits sweetly in the middle of the two, saying we have a technology solution to diversifying your revenues, right?
Exactly.
And everybody that I've spoken to about this just gets really excited because they don't even know that that's what they were looking for until it's put in front of them.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I know like the amount of times I've been at events and things, people want to donate with a credit card and there's just not an easy way to do it, or you're fumbling around with something, it's a different donor audience. It's, younger generations want to donate with their credit card. They want to get points. They want to do all that with their credit card. And DipJar helps you do that. So yeah, I appreciate those of you who are chiming in the chat that you love your dip jar and that you've been using it. We love to hear that. You guys are our best salespeople.
Yeah, that's great.
Does anyone have any other questions? We're coming down last couple minutes. Just want to sneak in any other questions for Kim. Obviously, when I do the follow-up with the presentation and the recording, I will include all of Kim's information so you can reach out directly to her, get started utilizing some of her services, get you, kickstarted with your strategic plan.
Yeah, I'm always happy to help, think out loud with folks if they don't really know where they're going or what they need. If they just want to chat for half an hour, I'm happy to set that up and just point you in the right direction, or, share some resources that I might have on hand. Happy to do that as well.
Awesome. Well, I'm not seeing any questions come through. So Kim, I just want to thank you so much. That was awesome. And I really appreciate everyone being so active in the chat and the questions and everything. It's always nice to have a really engaged audience. I think it helps get the questions going. People learn a lot. So we appreciate you. I hope everyone has a great rest of your week. For those of you in this area, I hope it's warmer than it is for me here in Pittsburgh. But
all right, folks.
All right.
Thanks for coming. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good one.
Bye.